Welcome to the Healthspan Collective, the podcast where science and wellness converge. I'm Nicole Doran, and I'm thrilled to have you join us as we dive into the world of regenerative medicine, integrative health, and the latest science and trends shaping how we live healthier for longer. Hi, Dr. Purita. Welcome back to the Healthspan Collective.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
For those that don't know, Dr. Purita is the Chief Medical Officer at Pureform. And he's also an orthopedic surgeon and considered a pioneer of the regenerative medicine industry. Happy to have you here, Dr. P.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So today I wanted to dive in a little bit with you on a term that, in my opinion, can be a little bit overused in our industry and adjacent industries. It is anti-aging. So we see the term anti-aging everywhere, and it seems like it means different things to different people. So I figured it might be interesting for, your audience to define what anti-aging and anti-aging treatments mean to you.
That's a very good question. So let me kind of pose this. Let me ask you, what does anti-aging mean?
We are all aging every second of every day, right? But it's like you want to preserve your youth. I guess that's how I
like that term.
Preserving your youth.
To me, what does anti-aging mean? Well, anti-aging is basically the science, and it's now a science. That means that we're trying to reverse some of the processes that cause our body to deteriorate. And now we know that aging is a disease, and that's a very important concept.
Okay.
And actually, the FDA is starting to come around to it too, thinking that aging is a disease. So to me, aging represents basically pathways that are starting to not work so well. And when we start looking at the aspects of aging, we go in a couple of things. First of all, we have an accumulation of what we call senescent cells. These are the zombie cells, the cells that should have died that did not die.
Okay.
What's another one that we have? All of a sudden, our proteins don't seem to be working so well. We don't make as many proteins as we should. And the proteins that we make don't fold into the cells quite the way they should.
And what does that mean for our body? What happens when your proteins don't fold into the cell the way they should?
This is kind of one of my pet interests. It's what we call heat and cold shock proteins. That's really a misnomer. They should really be called stress shock proteins. So when the body is subjected to a stress, these proteins are like little helicopters. They're like parents hovering over a protein, making sure it folds properly into the cell. When it doesn't fold properly, bad things happen. Basically, things like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and things like that. So, people don't realize that your whole body is made of proteins. And when the proteins start really failing you, you're finished. Remember now, proteins are in mitochondria. They're in your nucleus. They're everywhere. So you have to really maintain these proteins. And that's a very important aspect. Another important aspect, how we can kind of slow down aging and maybe reverse it, is nutrient sensing. That's a very important aspect. Now, what do we mean by that? How your body utilizes glucose.
Okay.
That's so important, how your body utilizes insulin. Those two things go hand in hand with each other. And when you have problems with your insulin, you start getting things like diabetes, and that can lead to a whole host of bad things happening.
Okay.
And stem cell exhaustion. You want to preserve your stem cells. You want to keep that bone marrow producing your stem cells and keeping you healthy. Remember, cells, not doctors, heal patients. It's one of my pet slides in all my talks, and that's an important aspect of it.
So can we get back to neurodegeneration a little bit? Because, speaking of your talks and the blogs that you've been writing lately, you've been focusing a lot on neurodegenerative diseases. And is it correct to say that neurodegeneration to some degree is part of everyone's aging, even if they don't have, a diagnosis of some kind?
Unfortunately, that's the case. And I guess a lot of it has to do with our environment. And we can get into that in a little while.
Okay.
Our environment has a lot to do with it. Now, granted, we're living a lot longer than we used to. I mean, 500 years ago, if you were in your 30s, you were considered an old person. But now, to me, an old person is, 100, 110, something like that. But it's different nowadays. But neurodegeneration is something that is going to hit us all. We all aren't as sharp as we were, years ago. But some people have a lot more of a problem with neurodegeneration. What are neurodegenerative diseases? Well, you have, for instance, Alzheimer's. That's an epidemic now. I mean, it's crazy. You know how much of our healthcare dollars goes to that, it's just amazing. And it's going to get worse as time goes on.
And they're calling it type 3 diabetes, aren't they?
Type 3 diabetes, because it basically involves some of the vasculature in your head. Diabetes is they say sometimes a disease of small blood vessels and things like that. And that's a very good term. And that's why I go back to saying how you handle your insulin and your glucose is going to really see how you're going to handle your health.
Okay. So I wasn't planning on going here, but now that you brought that up, would you say that like the GLP-1 peptides are anti-aging in a way because they're helping control your glucose and your insulin?
We're just learning about these medicines. I think we know a lot. No, we're just touching the surface. They're so important, and I think a very important thing for anti-aging. Why? Well, they'll make you lose weight, and that's going to do nothing but help you. Right. But more importantly, they reduce inflammation in the body. And remember, there's a good saying from Time magazine, I think it was in 2018. Inflammation and aging go hand in hand. One leads to the other. Aging causes inflammation causes aging.
Right.
So very important thing. And the GLP-1s can really seem to diminish some of that. There seems to be some talk that they may even use them in some studies on Alzheimer's and see if we can get there. But remember, you want to really try and prevent the Alzheimer's from basically occurring in the first place.
Right.
And that's the real key here. And that's what really anti-aging is. We want to try and prevent these afflictions of old age before they really get to the point where we really can't do much for them.
So beyond managing your blood sugar, what are some things? I mean, you mentioned our environmental factors. Tell me, does glyphosate play a big role?
Does it play a big role? It plays a huge role. For those of you that don't know what this is, it's a herbicide. It's basically Roundup. Okay. And if you notice, you see some ads on TV. If you've been exposed to Roundup and you've developed Parkinson's disease or other type of disease, contact our legal firm because we're basically part of a huge lawsuit. So that tells you that, that there's some bad things out there. And probably what's happening is it's causing inflammation in the body. But another thing that a lot of people don't realize about these kind of compounds like the Roundup and things like that, it's affecting your gut bacteria.
Okay.
And that's the real key. Remember now, this was a herbicide. And the bacteria are kind of like the go-between between, like regular mammals and animals and things and plants.
Okay.
So they're going to be much more sensitive to the glyphosate and things like that. And remember now, there's a gut-brain axis. Your gut determines so many things about your health. The more you do for your gut, the healthier you're going to be. That's why I eat a salad almost every day, 7 days a week. I mean, I'm an old Italian. I like my salad with some vinegar and oil, olive oil, that is. And it's a good thing for your health because it's keeping my gut healthier.
So obviously eating organic helps you avoid some more of that glyphosate, correct?
Right. But there's one little problem about organic, okay? And let me tell you. You can try and, eat organic, but realize when it rains, there's a lot of junk in the rain that gets on the foods. So It's tough. I mean, it's better than nothing to go organic.
You'd rather go organic than conventional whenever possible, right?
But you're still not truly organic.
Right. Unless you're maybe living on a farm in the middle of nowhere.
Even
then,
in the middle of nowhere, it depends on where the middle of nowhere is. Maybe in the middle of the ocean.
Okay. And then anything else people can do to avoid glyphosate, or is there a way to remove glyphosate?
There are some ways to remove. Now, I did a deep dive on this to myself. I said, let me look and see what are some of the ways of maybe getting rid of it. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Some of the municipal water companies use ozone in their water to help disinfect it and help get rid of some of the other things in there, one of which was Roundup. And I said, So I said, what do I do in my office maybe that can be similar? I said, we do something called EBO2, extracorporeal blood oxygenation and ozonation. And basically, we're kind of like the water company in that we're bubbling ozone into the watery part of your blood, the plasma. And we're going to help remove some of that glyphosate. Now, have there been very specific studies for this? Not yet, but they are coming. And I think the science is really there. I mean, there's no question that these ozone particles can help remove some of the glyphosate. It's going to help. Is it going to remove it all? Probably not, but it's going to make a difference, I think.
Okay. That's really good to know. And then I would assume other types of detoxification processes like being in an infrared sauna. I mean, really just like getting a good sweat is always a good way to get
One of
these
the better
toxins
ways
out of
to
your body, right?
detoxify yourself is a good sweat. You'd be surprised how much bad things come out of your sweat, so to speak. Other ways of maybe doing it, we can also go with the IV route. We might be able to use phosphatidylcholine,
Right.
which seems to help there. Again, studies are somewhat lacking, but they're starting to look at these studies because this is becoming a problem, and we think there's a direct link between some of these compounds and Alzheimer's and things like that.
And then what about glutathione? I know glutathione's detoxifying. Would that help?
Absolutely. I mean, it's glutathione is a peptide, and it's going to help. It's going to help reduce inflammation. Again, what does EBO2 do? Well, it's one of the things it does. It makes, these elements that cause reduction of inflammation, and that's why it works so well.
Okay. And then kind of moving away from glyphosate, how do viruses play a role in neurodegeneration as a whole?
Okay, so we all have viruses. We have viruses called Epstein-Barr, CMV, and a host of others that we had as kids, chickenpox, etc. As we age, these viruses become more and more prevalent, increase in numbers, and they basically start causing inflammation.
Okay.
Inflammation causes neurodegeneration. That's your enemy in your brain,
Right.
neurodegeneration and inflammation. So EBO2 and things like that. Methylene blue, which is another IV compound that we do here in our office, can help. And we have a special way of doing it. We photo activate it ahead of time before it's even put in an IV bag. And that just makes it much more potent and much more powerful to really go after these viruses. And we can't get rid of all, but we can diminish the viral load. A diminished viral load is going to make a patient who's healthier,
Right.
who's going to probably avoid some of these, kind of flus that go around an office and things like that. So that's a good thing to do.
Right. It diminishes the viral load. I heard recently that something like 40% of our DNA is made up of viruses by the time we're a certain age. And it's essentially like the more you can depress that, the more you can lower the viral load, the healthier you're likely to be. Would you say that's accurate?
Well, I would say that is. And actually what you do is you bring up an interesting thing. That's some of the newest technology we have, that we can kind of do CRISPR, where we're going to kind of insert a virus into a DNA to make it do things that we would normally not be able to do. It's kind of like a pair of scissors and some paste and things like that we can correct some damages. And that's going to be a big field that we're going to see as time goes on.
Right. And then obviously, we're all walking around with this viral load, but many of us feel totally fine. Why does that change as we age?
Again, like a lot of things in life, it's a numbers game.
Okay.
A small amount of viruses, no big deal. You're going to deal with them fine. A large amount, they're going to start causing, they're going to basically tax your immune system. And then, really, when all's said and done, everything here boils down eventually to your immune system. I say mitochondria, but eventually it's your immune system. Your immune system protects you not just from bacteria and viruses, but cancers and things like that. So the healthier your immune system, the better you're going to be, the better you're going to resist these things. And typically the longer you should live. And not only live longer, but live what we call the health span, where you're going to live, maybe to your 90s or so, but live and really enjoy life and be active and vibrant.
Have a high quality of life.
Correct.
Okay. That's really great. And then, what I wanted to touch on was the immune system, because I think a lot of people think of the immune system and, strong immune system. Yeah, maybe you don't get the flu that's being passed around the office, but your immune system plays a role with these big neurodegenerative diseases as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. And in some circles, you've heard maybe that patients have these tau deposits in their brain from Alzheimer's. But there's some scientific research that say that actually may be the immune system trying to protect the cells. So it's a little bit of controversy there. It's not as straightforward as we once thought. But the absolute truth is the immune system is really what's going to protect you. When all is said and done, it's your, I think now they're talking about an iron shield or something for the United States or something with the new administration. That's our iron shield, our iron dome, so to speak, against diseases.
Okay. And then something else I wanted to touch on, you've had kind of like this trio of treatments that you have recommended since I started working with you that I've heard you tell many patients over and over is really like if you had to choose 3 treatments to strengthen your immune system and kind of get to the root of this anti-aging, it would be what?
Well, I call it the trifecta, triad, whatever you want to call it. So basically, number one is the EBO2. Again, extracorporeal blood oxygenation, ozonation. Why do I pick that one? Well, what does that do? It reduces inflammation. Reducing inflammation, remember, inflammaging, but it also stimulates our immune system. It's a very potent stimulator of the immune system also. It also makes NAD, which I'll get into in a moment. So there's so many different things that it does. Okay, now, number 2 is NAD itself. What is NAD? Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Big fancy word. But what does it really do? Well, it's a coenzyme, and it helps the cells produce energy, ATP, which is the body's energy currency. I kind of say that all the time. But it's so important because we don't have enough of it. Every 20 years of life, our NAD levels go down 50%. Now, here's the problem that you had. That's all well and good, except as we get older, because of this inflammation and things like that, because of our senescent cells, we have further demands of NAD. There's just not enough to go around because not only do the cells need it, but now we basically need NAD to repair DNA damage. Remember, if you accumulate DNA damage, that typically leads to cancers and things like that. We also need NAD because of the fact that certain cells, they produce an enzyme called CD38, which is a very big consumer of NAD. So you can see why NAD is so important. And increased amounts of NAD is going to basically do nothing but pay you dividends. There's no question about it, okay? And the third part about it is something called a VSEL, very small embryonic-like stem cell. Now, I don't want people to get the misconception, oh, wait, these guys are using embryos now. That was actually strictly forbidden. And you know what? If I were to given the option by the FDA to use embryonic cells, I'd say no thanks. They're very dangerous cells. But the EV cells, very small embryonic-like stem cells, are your own cells. They're sort of an emergency stem cell supply. They only get activated by stress. Now, how do we stress them? Well, we put them at a very cold temperature and we give them very low oxygen conditions. But they basically can do a lot of different things. They can get in all the nooks and crannies, and they can penetrate something called the blood-brain barrier. You know, the brain has a barrier to allow a lot of things not to get to it. But these little V cells can. So they do a lot of basically damage repair behind the scenes.
Okay.
So, and as we get older, remember I said stem cell exhaustion, our stem cells get less and less. So this helps renew those and things like that.
Right. Yeah, VSELs are one of the most interesting things we do at Pureform, in my opinion. They can be so beneficial for people with autoimmune conditions.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, again, you know, they're basically so small. They're so much smaller than a regular stem cell. That's why there's been some controversy in the past because these cells were hard to identify. I mean, they're very much smaller than a regular cell. But what these cells can do is they can help basically repair the conditions because they're what we call pluripotent,
Okay.
meaning they can form many different kinds of cells. Most cells, like, you know, cells from your fat, which is MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells, or your bone marrow, they are kind of multipotent. They can form a lot of different tissue, but not pluripotent. You know, most of those cells can't form a nerve cell, whereas the pluripotent cell can form almost any type of cell. That's the beauty of that. That's why they call them embryonic-like. Like an embryo can form almost any type of cell.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like when I do VSELs and I try to do them once every 6 months, that's typically a recommendation for
Good idea,
a person, right? I feel like, because I've dealt with some hypothyroidism in my life, and I feel like it strengthens my thyroid function when I do them over the course of about 3 months. I feel like I have a little bit more energy. I just have a little bit more of like a pep in my step as a whole. I can think a little bit clearer. Do you find that from a lot of patients?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Now realize we're also kind of, you know, again, maybe I'm giving one of our little secrets away, but not only do we have the V cells in that formula that we're giving you, but we also have some very potent growth factors that come from your platelets that are given intravenously, which is a very interesting thing also. So it's a 1-2 punch, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So beyond this treatments, because obviously, you know, our treatments, A, you have to come to Boca to get them. B, you know, they're not cheap. If somebody were to supplement on a daily basis to get some of these benefits, which you would recommend alongside the treatments anyway, If you could choose your top 3 anti-aging supplements, what would you choose?
So I spoke about this to Nicole, and I said, asking me my top 3 supplements is like asking a parent that has 5 children, which of the 3 children you're going to go and rescue in the building? I can't give you my top 3, but I'll try my best. Okay, so what would I do? If I'm going to a deserted island, I would say I want to do NAD first of all. Now, you can't take NAD, so I would take an NAD precursor. In my opinion, I like nicotinamide ribose, which is from a lot of different companies.
Right.
Why do I want that? Well, it's going to basically give my cells that coenzyme to produce energy. It's going to repair my DNA damage. It's going to basically keep some of those senescent cells at bay, so to speak. So that's number 1. Number 2, what else do I like? Well, there's some things called gaseous singling molecules. One of the most important ones one can take is nitric oxide, okay? So basically, I would take something called Neo 40, and I would take a few a day. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, you should only take 1 a day. Well, I take 3 to 4 a day. But it's very important because it helps boost your immune system. Nitric oxide interferes, that's not the right word. Nitric oxide basically affects so many different pathways in your body. They're all related to it, and it's such an important thing. Now, my third would probably be berberine. Now, why do I say berberine? Because I'm going back to some of my basics. Remember how I said it's very important to control your glucose and your insulin. And basically, berberine is a very potent stimulator of the AMPK pathway, which is the major pathway in your body that what we call a nutrient sensing pathway. It determines how your body uses glucose. And if you basically utilize it in a very good manner, you're going to have very little in the way of problems when all is said and done. And it's also very potent anti-inflammatory. So I'm trying to get the biggest bang for my buck, so to speak, with these other things. But then again, you can go read my blog of my 12 go-to supplements. I'm like the old lady in the shoe with 12 children, not just 3.
Yeah, no, I take all 3 of those supplements per your recommendation, obviously, of working with you.
Now I'm assuming that I'm going to go to an island that's, hopefully in the South Pacific, nice and warm, so I get a lot of sun, so I get some vitamin D at least.
Right. Vitamin D would be
from the sunshine.
The alternate, right? Depending on where in the deserted island.
Really shouldn't be called a vitamin. It's actually a hormone.
Right.
When all said and done.
Right. And a lot of times you regulate your vitamin D, your other hormones will regulate themselves as well.
Correct.
But yes, when I started taking berberine, especially the human one, which you're a spokesperson for the supplement company Human.
Right.
Theirs is superior to the other brands I've tried. And I felt a big difference in it regulating my hunger level because it was regulating my blood sugar, and in my inflammation. I felt like a little bit of my water weight came down, a little bit of that like light joint pain that I feel sometimes went away. It's a super beneficial supplement.
Absolutely. And I was speaking to someone just a little while ago. They said, well, if somebody's on GLP-1s, can you still recommend it? Absolutely, I do recommend it. I have my wife, she's on GLP-1s, but I also have her taking berberine every day, and I think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Lori, hope you don't mind us sharing that.
Now, she doesn't mind.
But yeah, it's also really great for your gut health. It's antimicrobial, anti-cancer. It's a heal-all kind of supplement.
Well, now, let's just say one thing. It's not necessarily antimicrobial.
Oh, no?
Well, I mean, remember now, your gut is microbes.
Right.
But it is in a way antimicrobial because it gets rid of the bad guys.
Right.
The bad gut bacteria are not the ones you want. I mean, there's a whole host of them. You want the good gut bacteria.
Okay. Yes, that's what I should have said. It cleans up the bad gut bacteria. Okay, so we did kind of, the treatments that you would do ideally for anti-aging, then the supplements. Now to go even lower on the cost scale, what are some free things that people can do to take control of their aging?
Okay. Someone asked me, what's the best medicine you can give someone? And I tell them every time without a hesitation, exercise, okay? Exercise. You can't mimic exercise. There's some things they say, oh, it's exercise in a pill. Sorry, you still got to go through it. Listen, I'm up every day. I leave my house before 5. I'm doing my 4 miles. I'm coming back doing my elliptical for 25 minutes, getting my heart rate to the 140s. Then I go swimming. There's nothing that can replace it. And because it does so many, it stimulates so many pathways, the AMPK pathway. There's just so many things that it does. It basically increases your vascularity. It gives you more blood vessels, things like that. It's probably most important thing maybe to prevent neurodegenerative diseases.
Okay. So exercise, anything else?
Well, then we start getting into a healthy diet,
Mm-hmm.
intermittent fasting, things like that. These are and these are all proven entities. One thing I always tell patients, one thing we're not here is a med spa. We're a med wellness facility, and these are things that I tell the patients. All right, so these are simple, easy things to do. We can help you, but you also have to help yourself. It's as simple as that. I mean, we can give you guidance, we can do procedures and modalities, but it also is exercise. It's also intermittent fasting, eating properly, things like that. Look, we all can cheat a little while here and there, and there's no reason not to, but you just have to kind of do the pilgrim's progress, steady and, follow the path.
Right. And even, hot and cold therapies. Obviously, we've got our fancy cold plunge and infrared saunas and all of that, but you can go for a run, get a good sweat, and then take a cold shower, and that's a pretty beneficial hot and cold therapy as well.
Very, again, these are things that really are beneficial for you, and they're not, costly, and they're just, and when you start walking and doing exercise, it just gives you a sense of well-being that no medicine can ever replace.
Mm-hmm. And even being in nature, I mean, you're really into...
Oh, yeah. Working in the garden.
Yeah, you love working in your garden, but even, a walk on the beach or laying in the park, is a great anti-aging tip to just really get in touch with nature as well.
Working in the garden. I remember I wrote a blog once, and I raised some eyebrows because the name of my blog was Getting Down and Dirty. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, working in the garden." Oh, okay, that was fine. So, it wasn't X-rated after all.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add, Dr. P?
No, I think we've covered a nice variety of topics. I mean, there's so many, we could go on forever. One thing I will say, actually, one thing that gets me sometimes, I go to a meeting and I'll give a lecture, and I have some of these other docs up there, and they'll say, well, I'm Dr. So-and-so, I'm, 65, but biologically I'm actually 43. I don't know what that means, because, when people start looking at a couple of markers, we call biologic markers, and they say, instead of me being 50, I'm, 30 or something. Remember, aging is a mosaic. And I have some markers, I can say I'm that of a teenager almost or something, but it's a mosaic. And that's what we have to realize. There's so many facets of aging, and we're discovering it more and more. I mean, there's basically journals, medical journals devoted only for aging and things like that. So that's why you can see this is such an important field. Remember, it is a disease.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
This podcast was brought to you by Pureform, a comprehensive wellness center in Boca Raton, Florida. The website is pureformhealth.com, or you can find us on Instagram at pureformhealth. Feel free to message us with any questions, and note that you can connect with our providers for consultations over Zoom, from everything from stem cell therapy to hormone replacement therapy and peptide therapy. That's it for this episode of the Healthspan Collective. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and send it to a friend. We'd also love to connect with you on Instagram. Follow the podcast at Healthspan Collective and me at Nicole J. Doran. And leave us a comment on our latest post, letting us know what you'd like us to cover next.